Coming to you from the mountains and the plain, the only conservative voices brave enough to push back. This is the Conservative Daily Podcast with Joe Otto.
That's what the Second Amendment was designed to do. If you're going to do something to nullify or take away my rights under the Constitution, come get it.
Max McGuire.
When you look at politicians on the left, they need to convince people that they are victims.
A resistance to the resistance. And now your hosts, Joe Otto and Max McGuire.
And welcome back to another edition of the Conservative Daily Podcast. As always, my name is Max McGuire.
And this is Joe Otto.
And today we're going to be talking about a story that really started breaking and developing over the weekend. And this is the new credibility being given to an allegation being made against Joe Biden that he sexually assaulted a woman who was his staffer in the early 1990s. So we're going to go through that allegation, give it complete fair coverage because the mainstream media isn't covering it. We'll talk about the new developments, which is a CNN clip that was found of the woman's mom actually calling in, of all places, to the Larry King live show to talk about what her daughter was experiencing. And then we're going to cover how the mainstream media is covering up, how they're using technology and they're using their platforms to try and make this out to be nothing, and in some cases even trying to delete it off of the internet. And then, of course, we'll play a few cuts of Democrats saying that all women should be believed from the Brett Kavanaugh lynching. That's what that really was. So, Joe, I don't know if you've had a chance to follow any of this. Have you had a chance to read any of the allegations that have come from Tara Reade against Joe Biden?
I read some of it. I mean, I've been more concentrating, so everybody knows, concentrating more on what's happening with COVID and what's happening in Texas and I have read some of it, and I read, some of the stuff related to her mom, who has since passed.
Yeah.
And, him using his fun catchphrase, "Come on, man."
Yeah. Yeah. So just a brief explanation. Tara Reade, the woman's name is Tara Reade. She worked for Joe Biden's senatorial office, actually in the early 1990s. She was one of his staffers. And last year she was one of the 7 women who came out and alleged that Joe Biden had gotten handsy, right? That he had done things he wasn't supposed to do. Different people alleged different things. She was one of those 7. And as we all remember, Joe Biden came out and didn't really, he apologized, but he said that he never meant to sexually harass anyone. He just gets really touchy-feely, which, knowing what we know about Joe Biden, doesn't really fly with the information that's available in the public record. Well, Tara Reade didn't feel that her story was getting enough coverage, so she came out and she said that the story she had told was only half true. And it was worse than him just getting touchy-feely, that he actually sexually assaulted her, actually put his hand underneath her skirt. Really, really scary stuff. We're going to play this cut of Tara Reade on Katie Halper's podcast. And just a brief warning, she doesn't use any curse words, she doesn't use any profane language, but obviously she is describing what happened to her. So I don't want to put words in her mouth. I want to let her describe it in her own words. So just a brief warning that it gets a little explicit, but there's no curse words or anything. Let's hear it in Tara Reade's own words. Let's go to cut 1.
Called me in and said, "I want you to take this to Joe. He wants it. He wants you to bring it. Hurry." And I said, "Okay." And it was a gym bag. She said, "Take the gym bag." She called it athletic bag. And, she said he was down towards the Capitol and he'll meet you. And so I went down and I was heading down towards there. And he was at first talking to someone. I could see him at a different distance, and then they went away. And then we were in like the side. It was like the side area. And he just said, "Hey, come here, Tara." And then I handed him the thing and he greeted me. He remembered my name. And then we were alone, and it was the strangest thing. There was no exchange really. He just had me up against the wall, and I was wearing a skirt and business skirt, but I wasn't wearing stockings. It was kind of a hot day that day, and I was wearing heels, And I remember my legs had been hurting from the marble, of the Capitol, like walking. And so I remember that kind of stuff. I remember like that, and it was kind of an unusually warm day. And I remember I was wearing a blouse, and he just had me up against the wall, and the wall was cold. And I remember it happened all at once. The gym bag, I don't know where it went. I handed it to him, it was gone. And then his hands were on me and underneath my clothes. And, and then he went down my skirt, but then up inside it. And he, penetrated me with his fingers, whatever. And, he was kissing me at the same time, and he was saying something to me. He said several things, and I can't remember everything he said. I remember a couple of things. I remember him saying first, before, like as he was doing it, do you want to go somewhere else? And then him saying to me, when I pulled away, he got finished doing what he was doing, and I kind of was pulled back, and he said, come on, man, I heard you liked me.
So that, Joe, is her own words, what she claims happened to her. She is, out of all of the women who have alleged that Joe Biden has gotten handsy, gotten sexually aggressive with them, she is the only one who has come forward and made any claim even remotely this serious. As I mentioned, Joe Biden kind of laughed away the other accusations against him and said, oh, he's just handsy-feely, he just likes to touch people. But this is a much different allegation. And you can hear it in her voice. At first, I didn't know whether to believe her. Obviously, everyone deserves the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. That's a good time to mention that there is an active police investigation in Washington, D.C. into these allegations right now. But everyone deserves to be innocent until proven guilty. But as just a bystander, as someone who's just watching this play out, it rings true to me. I find this credible, and I find it credible for one reason, and one big reason, beyond what we learned from the CNN cut from Larry King. I find it credible because she describes Joe Biden as saying something that he always seems to say, which is that catchphrase that you mentioned, "Come on, man." And when I hear her tell that story, I've heard Joe Biden say it so many times. It's ingrained in my head. I can hear it when I stop and think about it. And that just makes it all that more believable. Now, whether or not she added that because she knows that's his catchphrase or not, again, that's up for other people to decide. But considering what went on with Brett Kavanaugh, with all of those women being trotted out in front of the media, and they had no actual proof at all, for this woman to telling her story and to see the media trying to squash it, it makes it feel like they didn't squash the stuff with no evidence, right? And here she is with a story to tell that rings true, and now this other evidence from the Larry King live show. It's just remarkable that the media won't cover it.
Well, it's more remarkable that they have hidden it. And you know, the difference between the loony left and what you're saying is, hey, I didn't know. You asked yourself the simple question. I didn't know if it was credible or not until you actually heard her speak. And then she didn't, there was no hyperbole built into it. There was no sort of victimology. She was just telling the story of what happened to her. But my problem is not actually with the credibility. I think that'll come out. There'll be evidence that'll be uncovered. My problem is with the weaponization of technology and the fact that big companies, right, that are supposed to operate with, journalistic integrity, are not preserving that information. They're actually going about it to hide it. So let's hide as much information as we can from the American people. They treat the American people as if they're stupid, and by the way, when you catch them doing this, there's an innocence to how they respond. And the innocence is this: oh, I didn't know that happened. Let me go look. Knowing that 5 minutes ago, they literally went through the process of whitewashing and removing that information. The scary part is that there are people out there that are buying into this. There are people out there that are saying, hey, regardless of what happens, we have to support Joe Biden. Yet in the same sentence, they will say, oh, President Trump, basically made this comment about a woman.
Yeah.
Right. And I find it fascinating that there's this mentality that selective forgiveness that happens on the left that allows for this to happen, allows for them to continue this rhetoric in the marketplace. And I think that the weaponization that we face today it's actually more scary, I think, than even the COVID it should be to some people. And that's because they're rewriting history, this revisionist history, and changing the narrative is, ultimately leading us down a path where, as American people, we don't have any control and there's even less accountability.
Yeah. So we'll get into what CNN or Google or a combination of the two did. Before we even get to the Larry King stuff, the New York Times edited one of their pieces. I believe it was last week. Let me find the exact date. It was April 13th. So they put out a piece on Joe Biden, and there was a quote in the piece, and they said, they were talking about this, and they said, no other allegation about sexual assault surfaced in the course of our reporting, nor did any former Biden staff corroborate Reid's allegations. We found no pattern of sexual misconduct by Biden beyond hugs, kissing, and touching that women previously said made them uncomfortable. That was an actual quote from the New York Times. We found no evidence except for all of this evidence. That article got edited. It got stealth edited. There was no announcement. There was an edit made. They edited it to remove the caveat, right? So they removed the part where they said, except beyond the hugs, kisses, and touching. So they edited it to say, we found no pattern of sexual misconduct by Biden. They did that, and there's reporting to suggest that they did that at the behest of the Biden campaign. So the article was accurate. They didn't find anything except for the things they found. It's a stupid way to put it, but it was truthful. And the claim is that they edited it at the behest of the Biden campaign. So everyone who saw it after that point didn't see the caveat that we did find sexual misconduct by Biden that other people have corroborated. It's just so slimy.
Yeah. Well.
So I want to play the clip, because the part that in that story that really rings true to me is Joe Biden repeatedly saying, "Come on, man." So I wanted to play this. Interestingly enough, this is from CNN. This is a cut of CNN going over how "Come on, man" has become Joe Biden's catchphrase. Let's go to cut 4.
It is the ultimate Joe Biden come on.
Come on, man. Come on, man. Come on, man.
Used to convey everything from sarcasm.
My heart breaks. Come on, man.
To enthusiasm.
Oh, come on, man. Let's do it.
In just a single interview, we counted 4 of them.
Hey, come on. What happens most? Come on, man. Come on, man. Oh, come on, man.
Yeah, so Joe, I listened to that.
Come on, man.
I know, I listened to it, and he always says it in that same way. I listened to that, and when I hear Tara Reid tell her story, when she mentions that he said, "Come on, man," again, we don't know if she's using that because she knows it's his catchphrase or if that's just more credibility. I can hear him saying it, right? And maybe that's not fair for me to be able to just jump to that, but to me, that lends credibility. So the next part of Tara Reid's story...
But Max, what does it mean? I mean, come on, man. What does it mean? Does that mean that we're not only weaponizing technology against the people to get them to believe a certain thing, but it also means that we've politicized our journalistic value.
Yeah.
We basically sold ourselves out for an ideology. And if we want to go back in history, we can look at, the Communist Manifesto and things that are said in there. You can look at way back to the Ming Dynasty. I mean, history will tell the same story, that anytime something independent becomes dependent or aligns with an ideology, that the erosion and or destruction of that society is not far behind. So we have to be very cognizant about what we're actually talking about right now. We have to be listening to what's actually happening as they change the narrative, because frankly, if we're not, what we're really doing is a political party is out there running the media.
Yeah.
It no longer is the media. It's not a media. It's a political party. And they have licenses. They're getting licenses from the federal government to play on the airwaves. And they're literally propagating the airwaves much like they do in China or other parts of the world.
Yeah, and it's not always what they put on. It's not always what they put on. It's what they keep off, as we'll talk about with this claim. So Tara Reade's claim goes on, and one of the differences between Tara Reade's claim and some of the Kavanaugh accusers is that she actually told people at the time what had happened to her. She told a friend of hers who has since done interviews, but doesn't want her name being put out there because she's afraid of facing reprisals. She told her brother, but obviously she didn't use the graphic language that she has recently with her brother. She just told him that something inappropriate happened. But she went into pretty explicit detail with her mother at the time. She shared it with her mother. So let's play 2 clips from her, from Tara Reade's interview on that podcast. Let's go to cut 2.
So then I went home and I called my mom because I didn't know who else to call. And she was wanting me to go make a police report like right then. My mom was very adamant that I do that and very strong about me doing that. And I said no. And we had like an argument about it. I said, Mom, you can't do that. And she had known about the other stuff and had encouraged me to document it, which I did, and go to the protocol about the sexual harassment. And then after this incident, I did follow her instructions and do that part.
So that's her explaining that she talked to her mom. Let's go to cut 3. This is where she really told her mom everything that happened. Let's go to cut 3.
My mom kind of pulled it out of me. I didn't give her a lot of details at first. It took her like an hour, and I became like physically ill for a couple. I was like, I don't know. I completely like curled up, and I called her crying, and she was really concerned.
So you called her?
Called her and cried and told her part of it, like talked around it. And then she got me to say the words.
So what did you say at first?
First I said there was something happened at work. It was kind of bad. And she said, kind of bad. What does that mean? And she kept like, asking me questions. And then finally I said, well, I had an encounter with Senator Biden, and I don't know what to do. And she said, what do you mean an encounter? What does that mean? And I said, well, she said, and then she got impatient. Tara, just tell me what you're talking about. And anyway, I don't remember how the whole conversation went from there, but I basically then gave her the layout. And she was, furious. Like she wanted to call the police. And then she was like, she was a mom, and she was just like, that's assault. And I was like, no, it's not. I did something. He said he thought, that I liked him. And I was like I almost like was defending him. It was bizarre.
Right.
Because I think I was kind of in shock.
So Joe, those, what really sets this, as I mentioned, apart is that this woman, Tara Reade, unlike some of the people who accuse Kavanaugh, who we now know were making it up, some of the accusations levied against Kavanaugh were made up. The difference here is that this woman told her mother about it at the time. Now, you can say that that's not a big deal, but there is evidence, at least at the time, that she was telling other people. She told her friend, she told her brother, and she told her mom. So it's crazy that the mainstream media hasn't run with this. I mean, obviously we know it's politicized at this point. If this was Donald Trump, they would run with this as fast as they could to make sure it got out in today's issue of the New York Times or the Washington Post. But with Biden, I mean, up until this weekend, and up until the Larry King live clip leaked, which we're going to play in a minute, up until this past weekend, CNN had over 700 articles of Christine Blasey Ford on their website. That was the woman who accused Brett Kavanaugh. They only had one that mentioned Tara Reade's name up until this weekend.
So let me ask you a question, right? And this is hypothetical, and I haven't done any research on this. And maybe somebody else out there that is listening will have some research on it. But isn't it plausible that the federal government, by executive order, that actually President Trump can shut down these news organizations? I mean, I think that he actually has in an executive order, he could shut down their ability to broadcast based on being a propagation unit or a tool for one party over another.
Yeah, I mean, I know that they are talking about some of that with like radio stations that are now found to be owned by the Chinese government. They're starting to talk about doing that. CNN, he would get huge pushback, obviously.
That's what they're doing. They're not going to broadcast. So they've come out in this broadcast unit and said they're not going to broadcast anything that the president says because they're for the people, right? But they're really not for the people, because if they're for the people, they would have, unequivocally an equal balance of what's being said or what's being done. But there is no equal balance. It's 100% leaning in the direction of, I think that Fox News, by the way, does a tremendous job about bringing people on that have differing opinions, right? They also have correspondents, and I think they're probably the most balanced news network out there. And, this is where I start saying that, hey, Max, I think that I actually do have a renewed faith that there are a lot of smart people in the country. The problem with smart people is that they don't have patience for stupidity, and they're less likely to vote in some elections if you just use statistics, because frankly, they just want to get on with their business, and they don't think anything they're going to say is going to make a difference to stupid people anyway. But I think Fox News does a great job. And so you see that they're the number one news network is not because they're the number one news network because they do a better job of bringing stupid people in. They bring a better job of articulating truth, right? Yeah. And making sure that it's also balanced. They're going to bring people in from the outside. They're going to have very liberal or somewhat liberal correspondents that actually engage with them. And they tend to root people out very quickly because their agenda is not for anything other than the people. Yeah. And what's really scary, though, in my opinion, as I just go off on this small little tangent, is that most of the other news networks don't care about the people. I mean, the conversation that they have is all one-sided, and it's all designed to create either hyperbole or hysteria and or some sort of drama. It's which, by the way, is a weakness of people. If you spend a lot of time in that area, if you just know anything about psychology, it's an indication of the weakness of your mind and the lack of intelligence.
Yeah. So what's interesting with CNN is that CNN actually had an opportunity to get into this story in a way that no other news agency could, because during this whole investigation, the reporters that were investigating these claims early on, Tara Reid told a reporter named Ryan Grimm that her mom had actually called into CNN back in the early 1990s. She didn't have the day or the year, but she told the reporter, Ryan Grimm, that her mom had called into Larry King Live and talked about it, and that she was mortified over it. So she went out and said to reporters that there was evidence out there somewhere that her mom had called into CNN, and CNN never even tried to find it. Let's go right now. Let's go to cut 5.
Really interesting in that Tara has objectively more contemporaneous corroboration. She told her mother, her brother to a slightly different degree, and her friend at the time. Her mother has since passed away, but her friend and her brother both remember that she did in fact tell her mother. So even though her mother's not here with us to say that, yes, right, it's true that she told me this, we have two people who say, yeah, she did tell her mother. Right. So that's, in a way, that's 3 people. She also said that her mother called into the Larry King Live show sometime in the 90s to say that her daughter had been sexually harassed by a powerful senator and retaliated against. That's a needle in a haystack that we have not been able to find yet, because she doesn't know what year it was. Right. They don't. The show did not use even first names. Right. It just say, caller from Seattle. Right. And so, but the fact that she, was willing to say that happened, that's a credible thing to say. Right. Because if it's not true.
Yeah. Why would you?
Somebody could ultimately maybe prove that it's not true. It's hard to find.
Right.
Yeah. So Joe, that's an important point, that when she goes on to this podcast, when she tells this reporter that there's evidence out there somewhere that her mom called Larry King, that was breaking news last week. And that was an opportunity for CNN to go through their archival footage to find whether this existed or not. If CNN wanted to disprove this woman's claims, which it's obvious that they do, they could have gone back and found whether it existed or not. But it turns out that that podcast that we just listened to, the Katie Halper podcast, one of their listeners was able to find in their archives the clip from Larry King Live of Tara Reade's mom calling in. So it's interesting to me because this was the opportunity for CNN to make themselves part of the story and to take this over and to run it the way they wanted that story to be run. And they didn't take the bait. They didn't take the opportunity.
Yeah. So, and I don't think that even now they're still remaining silent.
Well, no,
right?
they are covering it, but they're covering it with like a he said, she said.
Right.
Which at this point, it's a little harder to do that. Let's real quick play actual.
Wait, has Biden actually even commented
hasn't.
on it?
I don't think he has. As of right now, midday on Monday, he hasn't. But I know his campaign had previously called her a liar. So before we go any further, we've been leading up to it. Let's play. This is the clip from Larry King Live that Tara Reade said existed, that CNN never bothered to find, and that some other podcast listener found and handed over to the media. Let's go to cut 6.
We're back. A couple more phone calls on this very important topic. Our guests are former United States Senator Howard Baker, Richard Allen, former National Security Advisor, and Lois Romano of the Washington Post. San Luis Obispo, California. Hello.
Yes, hello. I'm wondering what a staffer would do besides go to the press in Washington. My daughter has just left there after working for a prominent senator and could not get through with her problems at all. And the only thing she could have done was go to the press, and she chose not to do it out of respect for him.
Or she had a story to tell, but out of respect for the person she worked for, she didn't tell it.
That's true.
So, Joe, that is the clip that Tara Reade said existed. She didn't know when it was, that no one in the mainstream media bothered to try and find. And some podcast listener, not to our show, but to another show, heard that this existed, went through their own, I guess they were recording Larry King in the early 90s, and found this. This was on August 11th, 1993, and people have now confirmed that that's the voice of Tara Reade's mother. She doesn't use her name. No one used their name on Larry King's show at the time, but she did give the same hometown that she lived in. So this appears to be this definitely lends credibility to the claim, because if Tara Reade was lying and this clip didn't exist, then she would have been completely blown out of the water, right? She would have been discredited. But it turns out that, yes, this clip did exist. And obviously, her mother didn't use the same graphic language that she did to describe it. And you'd never expect that from a mother. Honestly, if my mother called in to a on TV talk show and used graphic language to describe anything I did, I'd be furious, right? So that's her being a good mother, trying to explain it without explaining it. But as Tara Reade has told her story, the people on the left who are calling her a Russian shill, they're actually calling her a Russian operative. Their biggest claim was that, okay, well, she told her mother's not alive to tell that story anymore. And now here we go with an actual clip that suggests very strongly, though she didn't use the words, that she knew what happened to her daughter and that her daughter told her about it. It's hard to ignore this claim after this clip just came out over the weekend.
Yeah, and where the Kavanaugh hearing had no evidence. Not only did it not have any evidence, but it didn't have any narrative behind it. Like nobody could even remember what house. I mean, it was literally like making up a story that no one could remember. Like no one came forward and said, I remember her telling me this. I remember it never happened. Yeah. But now we have something where, her mom called up, was on Larry King Live. She's very articulate, and not only is she articulate, but she's matter of fact about it.
And she hates Trump, and she doesn't want Trump to win. But she also doesn't want to be silenced. So we're going to talk a bit. We're going to take a real quick break, but when we come back from the other side, we're going to talk about what CNN and or Google did in response to this. Here's a hint. They didn't make it easier for you to find these clips. And we're going to talk about what that means, whether organizations like CNN should be able to hide stories like this and get away with it and maintain their title of being objective. So we'll cover that on the other side of the break. Don't go anywhere.
Ronald Reagan famously said that our freedoms are never more than a generation away from extinction. Conservative Daily exists to make sure that never happens. With our community of 700,000 members, we fight every day to hold Congress's feet to the fire and stop them from surrendering our rights and freedoms. The fight to take this country back is not over. Please join our movement right now by going to conservative-daily.com and clicking the subscribe button to sign up for our free call to action newsletters. We have a chance to save this country, but only if we all work together. Again, this is conservative-daily.com, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button at the top.
We're back from the break. We are talking about the new credibility being lent to the claim that Joe Biden allegedly sexually assaulted one of his staffers in the early 1990s, in 1993 to be exact. We're talking about how the Larry King Live tape. Well, let's get into that, Joe, because one of the interesting things about all of this is right after this news story broke with the Larry King Live tape becoming known, people realizing that it existed, people started posting it on Twitter, posting it on YouTube, and all of a sudden, if you look at the Google Play Store, which is one of the stores that had housed Larry King Live's old episodes, you go on there the same day that that all of this came out, the episode that Tara Reade's mother had called in on, again, that was August 11th, 1993, that episode was just missing. You could see the episodes for August 10th, you could see the episodes for August 12th, but there was no icon to click to download the August 11th, 1993 episode. CNN claims that it wasn't them. Google claims that it wasn't them. Had to be somebody, right? There's somebody.
This is that whole thing that you can just deny it. Oh, I'm sorry. That it was an honest mistake. Mistake.
Yeah, I mean, it's an honest mistake that minutes after this becoming breaking news, we just happened to take down the episode so you can't buy it and watch the whole episode in context. It's really disingenuous. I mean, we talked about what the New York Times did with admitting that Joe Biden had hugged, groped people, and then deleting that from their story at the behest of the Biden campaign. We see what YouTube is doing now. That I'm waiting for the next shoe to drop. I'm waiting for CNN to claim ownership of the videos and to take them down with like a copyright notice. That's the next step, right? It goes up in severity, but if CNN actually wanted to take all of these clips down, they could take a lot of them down. Unless you're on talking about it like we are and adding our own opinions to it, then you're not protected by fair use. CNN could say that you're violating their copyright and take the videos down. That's going to be the next shoe to drop if it does. But I see this, and remember that Google held like a post-mortem after the 2016 election to try and figure out what went wrong. And instead of recognizing that they got it wrong and that they didn't understand what the American people actually wanted, Google has resolved to do a better job of putting their finger on the scale this time around. And we've seen it from Twitter, right? We've seen it from YouTube, from Twitter, from Facebook. They are injecting themselves into these political discussions more and more. Last week, Joe, we talked about the UV light that Trump had talked about putting inside the body. There was a company, a bio firm, that's actually traded on the stock exchange. It's a biotechnology firm. They have developed, and they're working with Cedars-Sinai, the hospital, on a technology to put LED, I want to make sure I get this right, to put LED lights inside of breathing tubes to try and shine the UV light on the virus inside of people's lungs to kill the virus that way. They are partnering with the hospital. They're traded on the stock exchange, and they put out a video explaining what the technology does. Before Trump made the comments, a New York Times reporter found that video, saw that Trump supporters were using it to back up what Trump had said, and that New York Times reporter pressured YouTube into taking it down. Twitter has now responded by suspending their Twitter account. This is a publicly traded biotechnology company working with a highly reputable hospital on new wave technology to fight the virus using UV light. And instead of admitting they got it wrong, that Trump was actually telling the truth, they've responded, the tech companies have responded by silencing the company.
Wow.
It makes my head explode.
But so I think that we just have to take a sensible approach to this, right? And the sensible approach is very simple. People can do, and everybody says, well, come November, make your vote count. And I would tell you that there's a lot of different ways to make your vote count. And there's a lot of different ways that you can make sure that those companies that are out there weaponizing technology and doing these things feel it. And that is, don't use their products. And you say, oh, Joe, I have to use Google. I'm thinking to myself, you don't have to use Google. Well, then I have to use Microsoft. Well, don't have to use Microsoft either. There's other alternatives out there. The bad part is that the technology is kind of, it really is, and we've talked about this on several shows, it really is the elite companies and those CEOs that sit at the very top, and then the politicians, and then the government workers. And the way it works is that these big companies bark down and fund politicians, and the politicians then do favors and create kind of a graph network, right? That's how the corruption works, into the government. And the government puts pressure on the people and attacks people with impunity. And so you can't actually see it happen. People go, oh, come on, people aren't like that. They are like that.
Yeah.
There is a lot of people like that. And in order to uncover it, you have to get 5, 6, 7, 8 layers deep. And the reality of it is that the people at the very bottom of the social pole on the government want to move up. And the way to move up in a corrupt or graph-driven system is to do well, or to do that favor for someone up the chain, who then is doing a favor for someone up the chain, who's doing a favor for the politician, who's doing a favor for the company. So it's very easy in this country to hide improprieties, where in other countries it's not as easy, right? Because those countries are actually run by the government, and it's noted that they're at the top of the food chain. And so as we start looking at what's happening with this story, I think the American people are starting to wake up, Max. I think they're starting to see that there's a larger issue at play here, and that the lack of accountability in government, lack of transparency, is a real thing.
Yeah.
And that there is so much corruption in the U.S. government. There's so much corruption with the politicians, and self-gratification and greed. There's so much of that happens even above them, that it's no longer, we're not talking about conspiracies. A conspiracy is only a conspiracy if it's something that you can't prove.
Yeah.
We can very, very, very easily prove that there's conspiracy, even if you had a half a brain.
Well, that's a conspiracy theory. Like, there are definitely conspirators. I mean, there are conspiracies that are put into action. It's when you call it a theory that you don't have the proof behind it. I think what's a little bit worse in this case is that it's not just CNN trying to cover it up. It's CNN trying to backpedal on their own claimed moral superiority. We look back at all the times that CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, just look back and think about the coverage that they had around Brett Kavanaugh, and how they gave Julie Swetnick and Michael Avenatti airtime to push forward a debunked lie. We now know it was a complete lie. It was complete fabrication. But CNN gave Michael Avenatti, who, by the way, is now in prison, and Julie Swetnick airtime to air completely uncorroborated, and we now know false, allegations around Brett Kavanaugh. Allegations that he raped someone. That's what the claim was, that she saw it happen. And that quickly fell apart. We see that they do that. And they make these claims that we have to believe all women, which from just an objective perspective is ridiculous, because women are not immune to lying. Men and women both lie, right? Your chromosomes do not determine how trustworthy you should be. But that's their argument. We don't claim believe all women. They do. So when they say believe all women must be believed. And this idea that when you have multiple accusers, that lends credibility to it. Here we have that with Biden, and we have a woman who's telling a very credible story. Now listen, credible doesn't mean that it's true. Credible just means that it rings true and that you believe it. And that you hear what she's saying. Here, let me put this poll up right now, see what people think. Do you find Tara Reade's accusation against Joe Biden to be credible? Credible, again, doesn't mean that you think it's absolutely true. It's just that she's given you enough evidence that you find it at least convincing that it could have happened. So when I see how the mainstream media covered Kavanaugh, and then I see here we're having a very similar thing where a woman's coming forward, except this time she has evidence This time she has the receipts. She has the actual calls into Larry King, and it's just crickets. So it's not just that they're trying to cover up for Joe Biden. It reveals that the claim moral superiority that they've been pushing forward all of this time has been a complete crock. It's been a lie. They never actually believed in the phrase "believe all women." If they drop that like a bad habit, the minute someone comes and makes an allegation against their boy, Joe Biden, then it's not what they actually believed. It's obvious. Their hypocrisy is on full display. Right? And we always joke that if the left didn't have double standards, they have no standards at all. This is a prime example of that. So yes, it's the mainstream media trying to cover this up. Yes, it's tech companies trying to cover it up. I imagine that the people at Twitter and at YouTube are working overtime to make this kind of content harder to find organically in their search engines. It's not just about that, though. It's that they've built up this pedestal and they've put themselves on it and said, we are the moral superiority. Joe, the Washington Post new motto is democracy dies in darkness. And yet when it comes to these allegations against Joe Biden, credible allegations, they've refused to cover it. If democracy dies in darkness, what does it say about someone like the Washington Post who sees something like this and refuses to turn the light on?
Yeah, it's I don't really understand how. I'm sitting here actually just researching kind of all of this and trying to pull up some information about Tara, because you said she doesn't like Trump. She actually doesn't like Trump. And
Not at all.
She's very clear about that. Yeah. So then
like she still wants him to lose. She just doesn't want to be silenced.
Right. And I think that's an interesting play, is that she's actually uncovering things that the double standard that exists on the left.
Oh, absolutely.
It's hard not to become discouraged by all of this kind of funneling together at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. And the fact that Biden, I want to tell you a story, because this is actually interesting to you. I'm going to squirrel a little bit for a minute. So I happened to have a conversation with a retired FBI agent yesterday. Mm-hmm. And we were at a location I'll say is undisclosed. We weren't, not because I don't want to say it, but it's because I don't really want to, I didn't get his permission to tell this story. But he told me, just kind of going all the way back to the, Bob Hansen days and having worked in that same office and blah, blah, blah. And then we were talking about politics, and, he's ambivalent about just all politicians and what, and kind of what they represent. But what he said was, do you know back in the 90s who the dumbest person in Washington was considered? Do you know, Max?
Oh.
I mean, literally, it was a running joke, both on the political side and on the ABCs, like the CIA, FBI.
Bill Clinton?
No, it's Joe Biden. Joe Biden, hands down, was known as the dumbest human being in Washington.
Well, he's had his top taken off a couple times.
Yeah, but I mean, this is what I'm telling you is this is literally, they would have conversations. Everyone there thought Joe Biden was the dumbest human being known to man. Doesn't it just make you wonder why the dumbest human being known to man, that all the politicians agree is dumb, right, was chosen as the vice president because he's dumb, right? And they want to elect him. He actually won the nomination, the nod as a Democrat.
Well, he hasn't won it yet. He hasn't technically won it yet, but everyone's pretty much given up and said you can have it. Listen, I've heard stories that Joe Biden was when he had his Secret Service detail, he would deliberately swim naked whenever women were on the detail. We've seen all of the pictures of him like sniffing young girls' hair. We've seen him grabbing women and young girls in their chest. Really gross stuff. And even if you give him the benefit of the doubt, there's so much of these clips that you would think that someone on the left would say, yeah, this guy we can't elect him. Putting aside the dementia arguments, which are very strong too, that he doesn't actually know where he is. He was campaigning in New Hampshire, Joe. Everyone knows that New Hampshire is the first actual primary after the caucus in Iowa, and he thought he was in Vermont. I mean, he's been a career politician who knows that Vermont wasn't the second state. Why would he think he's in Vermont? I mean, there's all this evidence, but then you look at this, where he's being accused of sexually assaulting. In some states, that would even be considered rape. He's being accused of this. The media is covering for him. The tech companies are covering for him. The DNC is covering for him. And we talk about it, this idea of of a two-tier justice system, of one set of rules for all of us and one set of rules for the elected officials. Now, as I mentioned, there's an active police investigation in Washington, D.C. looking into these claims. What they'll be able to find, I have no clue. They probably won't be able to actually recommend a prosecution because there's no actual evidence to find, unless Joe Biden were to sit down and admit it, which he obviously could. But it's just... I agree. It gets depressing because you see what these people are able to get away with. And you know that if there was an R next to their name, they'd be dragged through the mud. If there was an R next to their name, they'd even be thrown in prison in many cases. And that there's this special consideration given to people who are Democrats. And across the board, in the media, in politics, in the criminal justice system, we see that Democrats are treated with kid gloves, if they're even handled at all. And it's... You wait for, you wonder, when is the dam going to break? Who's going to be the first one that stands up and says, no, I'm not going to let this happen. They're going to make sure that they don't get a cushy plea deal, right? Who's going to be the first one who actually swims upstream and decides not to let one of these people off the hook? I don't know if it's going to happen now.
Because a cancer that builds in the government builds very quickly. Right. If you're a bad person in government, you surround yourself with bad people. You don't surround yourself with people that have ethical standards. Right. And that's why the government has become so dangerous, is because, they've forced the American people to be the tax bibs. Right. So we're actually small businesses, medium businesses. We have to collect taxes for the government, and we send them to the government. They don't compensate us for doing that. We become the tax collectors. Right. Yeah. We become the ones that they treat like slaves. There's no difference than what we're doing now than what we did 300-400 years ago, when the tax collector would walk into a municipality or a town and put out the bag and go door to door and collect cash from everyone. There's no difference in what we're doing now, right? But the amount of corruption that happens in government, that exists in government, anyone that stands up, Max, doesn't have a voice because there's too many other people there to silence it. And the movement that's happening today in the U.S. is more towards people resisting that, saying, look, the reason why I have to work and my wife have to work, right, and we have to raise our kids through daycare and then pay them a bunch of money and create this economic system because we don't have a choice. There is no choice to say, can my wife stay home and take care of our kids? There's no longer a choice. Yeah. Just like there isn't a choice that we have to do the stupid Common Core crappy math that Bill Gates came up with. That's absolutely the dumbest thing that I've ever seen in my life. Yeah. We are being forced into an environment where we're having to drink the Kool-Aid. And we don't even know that the Kool-Aid is poisoned.
Well, so I've been thinking about this, and I mean, as we were talking about that Democrats get a pass, I don't even think it's always just Democrats. I think it's just always government officials, deep state officials. Right. We talked about this briefly on a past episode a couple weeks ago. I think it was early April. There was an article that got put out that the FBI announced it will not prosecute an FBI employee who was fired for child pornography possession. Let me say that again. The DOJ fired an FBI employee because he was caught in possession of child pornography. Caught.
Right.
It was enough to fire him, but they're not going to prosecute him over it. So the only thing that happens to him is he loses his job. Right? They had to be able to prove that he did something wrong to fire him, because all those government employees have crazy protections from being fired for no reason.
Right.
But when it came to actually prosecuting, they refused to take that evidence. And I mean, maybe it means they acquired it illegally. I mean, that's always a possibility. But they refused to prosecute him over it. It's just, you see things like that, and you know that if any of us, God forbid, were in a situation like that, you wouldn't get any leniency, even if not for child pornography, even just for any charge, right? You wouldn't get that kind of leniency. No. And it makes you realize that the whole thing's rigged. I mean, Trump was right when he said the whole system is rigged. We're going to learn this week. I mean, a lot of reports are out there that Michael Flynn is going to be exonerated this week because of what just came out, which is that the FBI were in cahoots with his legal team and literally were trying to railroad him. So look for that this week, but something has to give. And I know you say that it's probably not going to ever happen, but it has to. I mean, if it doesn't give, then the American people, eventually we're going to have enough. We're going to have enough, because you can't live like this. You can't live where the minute a Republican is accused of something, they get 24/7 news coverage. But Joe Biden gets credibly accused of sexual assault with a woman who has the receipts. And it just gets no coverage. At some point, just turning off the channel isn't good enough. You've talked about taking CNN off the air. That's a very extreme example. I know that Donald Trump and the administration can compel CNN to air certain footage in furtherance of our national security, but it's tough to do. And the real question is, what should happen to the tech companies, to the media companies who are caught carrying water for the Biden campaign? Because this doesn't happen by accident. They always love to say it's an accident. Well, an accident has a 50-50 chance of going each way. And every time we see one of these accidents, they always support the Democrats and they always oppose the Republicans. I mean, it's the odds of flipping a coin 50 times and it turning up heads every time. Astronomical odds, right? At some point, we have to just accept that this is all BS. And the real question is, what do we do about this? What do we do about the outlets and the tech companies that are obviously trying to cover up for this gross misconduct?
I know what to do. I mean, being in the technology world and just understanding it, you have to combat by creating and innovating something that gives people options. And then you have to resist the government intervention, and you have to resist big companies coming in and corrupting what you're doing by setting standards or poison pills that allow for leadership to follow a set standard or rules. And I think that that's what we're missing, right? We're missing an alternative, a viable alternative, not one that someone's built or cooked up in the back room and said, hey, look, this is an alternative to Facebook. Yeah. And there are, and by the way, making sure that it's bipartisan, make sure that people have the ability to say what they want, do what they want, and you know, give people the ability to thrive, right? To have free thought, to surround themselves or not surround themselves with certain people, and to have different standards. I mean, the standards right now on Facebook is that they can tell us what's fake and not fake. Google can remove stuff. They use fact-checking things that you can't actually dispute. So if you wanted a balance, if you wanted to know if there was a real balance out there, then when Facebook goes in and says, hey, this is considered fake, there should be a button that says, I want to challenge. I want to challenge the fact that this is fake. But there isn't. They're the ultimate authority of what information you can give.
And the challenge is that, I mean, it's all well and good to say we need an alternative, but removed from Google's ecosystem, YouTube is not profitable. If YouTube cannot participate in everything else that Google's doing with the rest of the AdSense environment, right, with Google Maps, with everything else Google's doing, on its own, YouTube would not be profitable. It wouldn't. The only reason that they're able to run a profit on it is because it's connected to everything else that Google is doing. And even then, I don't even know if it's entirely profitable. Like the idea of, to beat YouTube, we just have to create this giant website that lets anyone upload high definition video at no cost. I mean, that's a tall order, right? That gets expensive with servers, with hard drives. That gets very expensive with bandwidth, very expensive very quickly. It's easy to say that, but it's a lot harder to do. I think one of the ways to go after this is to attack them because they truly do believe that they are a platform. So we've talked about this on the show in the past. I'm not going to get too much into this because it's very technical, but news websites can either be two things. They can either be a platform that allow people to go on and post whatever they want. Facebook, right now, if you look at our comment section, it is a platform. We do not have any comment moderation set right now. Don't test me. I'll set it up if I have to. There's no comment moderation automatic setup. So people who want to comment can. When it comes to a publisher, publishers see what's coming in and they decide what gets put up. They add their own editorializing to it. And as such, they're legally responsible for what they post. So right now, if someone was to go into our comment section for this live stream and was to call for violence or threaten someone, do something illegal, Joe, you and I would not be on the hook because we aren't publishing this. This is just a platform. Facebook would not be on the hook. We would take it down, but we wouldn't be on the hook. Now, if we ran our own publishing outfit and someone sent us an op-ed declaring that they wanted to kill the president or something, and we were then to publish that, then we would be a publisher. We would be liable for what we put out there. So that's the difference. Companies like Facebook, YouTube are hiding behind their status as a platform. They're claiming that they don't decide what goes up. It's free. Everyone gets to just put up what they want. But at the same time, they've put in these fact-checking arguments. They've put in these limitations on what you can and cannot do, right? YouTube and Twitter are now taking down things that go against what the World Health Organization is advocating. By that logic, if you were to post that COVID-19 cannot be transmitted between person to person. That was what the WHO was saying in January, right? So at this point, it's impossible to claim that they're platforms.
Right. So that's the difference between that's how you can actually define whether or not something's been weaponized, right? Anytime that you actually have the full authority on truth and you do not allow for any sort of disruption in that truth, you are in essence using propaganda. You are becoming a tool or a weapon for a particular ideology. And you would be foolish not to see that, not to actually be able to do something. And when I said that, hey, Trump has the ability to take things away from people, there's billions of dollars in credits and things that are given to large corporations like Google and Facebook and Amazon that can be taken away. And I think that we have to get to the point where we're willing to take those things away. What we're doing right now is we're allowing them to act with impunity, right? We're allowing them to weaponize what they're doing against the American people. And the American people really, honestly, I mean, if I had to just sum it all up, they care, but they just want to live in peace. They want to have the same thing everyone else does. They want to have, the availability to have options or opportunity. They don't want to be caught in a trap, right, of the government deciding whether they can or cannot prosecute them or persecute them. They want to roll down the street and feel like they can just, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. I mean, those things are real. That's what the American people want.
Yeah.
Right. When you have outside influences, people that come here that want to create revisionist history and or divide the people, it is all designed to destroy the ethos or the culture of our communities, of our country.
Yeah.
And it's working because we're letting it happen. And so the people that are really smart, where before they would sit on the sidelines and they would not have an opinion, they're now being forced to come to the table and have an opinion. They're being forced to come to the table and talk about the things the American people are they're being forced to be unselfish.
Yeah.
So I believe that we're in a movement. I believe that we're in a place where if the government is going to do this and build this fraternity of people, then we as people have to build that fraternity as well. And the problem with that is that you have to be able to vet that organization. You have to be able to make sure that there's no compromise given. So finding truly people of character that care 100% unselfishly about anything other than the people around them, it's going to be very difficult. And I think the government knows that. But we're going to have to do two things. One, we have to deplatform people, just take them and put them in a place where they own their own information. And you obviously know that we've been working on that for a long time, right? So I think that will be the next thing that happens. And the second thing is that we have to come together as people. And I don't think that we've done a very good job of that. But I do think that there's hope because I think people are waking up to the fact that we can't continue to go down this path where we let the loony left kind of dictate and weaponize technology in the way that they're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's well said. And going after websites like Facebook and YouTube, if they want to have the protections of a platform, which means that they're not legally liable for what gets said because they're not the ones saying it, then they cannot restrict speech the way they are. Because when they're picking winners and losers, when they're deciding what can and cannot be posted, beyond just saying something illegal can't be posted, they're actually editorializing and saying, no, you can't post that because we disagree with it. If they're doing that, then you have to open them up for legal liability, because if they're going to decide what can and cannot be said on their platform, then they're a publisher, they're not a platform, and they should be held responsible. And you open up that legal liability. You do the same for CNN for things that are proven to be false or lies. You open up that legal liability, and it will at least force them to think twice about whether or not they want to silence someone or whether they want to spread mistruths. Well, that's going to be it for this edition of the Conservative Daily Podcast. Remember that you can download and subscribe to the podcast on the Google Play Store as well as Apple Podcasts. You can do that for free. You can also find us on the Podbean app as well as conservative-daily.com/podcast. Please do subscribe. Please do like, comment, and share. Let us know what you want us to cover. And it really helps us as we pick what topics we want to talk about. So again, my name is Max McGuire.
And this is Joe Otto.
And remember that the fight to take back our country is not over, but the only way we can win is if we all fight together.